Thank you. Well, it's all downhill from now after that. And part of my theme was that you mustn't be embarrassed to be pro-life. And after that video, sorry, that might have to cross that bit out. Actually, my point is that there are very remarkable people here this weekend, and I'm not referring to any of us speakers. We've had our bouquets. You are light years ahead of where we were when we were your age. You certainly are in comparison with myself. There are two ladies here who have had to go because they're on their way back to Romania. I don't know whether you met them, but the 21-year-old Romanian on the 21st and 22nd of March is organising 30 marches around Romania. She's been doing this herself, plus a conference, plus a pro-life concert on the same 2 days. Absolutely remarkable. We have here representatives of the Alliance of Pro-Life Students. Are they here? Would you like to stand up? Well, you know, they have... That's right, you can sit down now, thank you. You registered who they were. You know, they were very kind. They said that they were inspired to form this out of this conference. That's wonderful. And they are there to help you. So everything that you've learned here this weekend, you don't have to remember it because you can be reminded again by people with very recent experience in this field and great vision. I think the Scottish delegation have left. Is there anybody left from Project Truth here? No, but yes, please stand up. Please stand up. Project Truth and their colleagues, Rachel and Leonora from the Scottish office, they have invited you to take part in their exciting work at their roadshow, which is taking the message not only throughout Scotland but in other parts of Britain too. Dan, Matthew, Selina, are you here? Can you stand up, please? Sorry, Matthew. There's Dan at the back. I'm sure Catherine won't mind me deferring to the Dan, Matthew and Selina and their important work in keeping in touch with you about some of the things we've mentioned. Not least the pro-life change in April, joining one, as Dan suggested you might, or even holding a pro-life chain. We'll be in touch with you about that, and of course the whole education work in schools. We presented to you our Schools Talk Hoodoo presented it to you on Friday evening. I'm sure all of you here could learn that presentation and you're becoming familiar with the arguments and so on. Many of you came here on your own, but you're not going to be on your own any longer. I thought it was very courageous of you to do that. You're not on your own. We will be pestering you like that. And you can just, you know, delete the messages if you like. You know, you're still free, but we hope you won't. There was a young man called Patrick from Leeds Trinity, and he stood up and he was very unassuming, and he more or less said, there's these difficult questions they throw at you. And I can't remember what the particular question was. The woman's welfare, he said. The woman's welfare. And what if you have an abortion because of your welfare? And, you know, I know exactly what he means. You can be in this work for 4 decades and somebody comes up to you and says, well, supposing I have an abortion for my welfare. Everything goes out of your head. Because you've got somebody standing there in front of you, a real person who's saying what they really mean. And you think all the theoretical arguments you've learned, how does that fit here? You know, I think John Henry Weston helped us a lot there when he talked about how you're here, you're standing up against abortion because you love your fellow men and women, because you're compassionate. But the debate that we had yesterday, all the rehearsing of the different arguments, we can't hear them too often. And it doesn't matter how long we've been. Don't think, oh, I must be stupid, or, you know, I just don't remember these things. It's very, very hard because, you know, not to put too fine a point on it, we're up against evil, not necessarily evil people, but evil. And that throws everything out of our mind because we feel so concerned about the issue. So I think we should listen as well to what Fiorella said on the first evening. You know, we're not going to go away. We're not going to shut up just because, you know, we dry up. We have to form ourselves. You've got everything that you've heard at this conference has been recorded. It's all on YouTube. You can watch any of the presentations that you've heard this weekend again. And you've really gone into things deeply this weekend. I'm not sure we've ever had a talk going into the issues quite so deeply as Dr. William Newton did when he was talking about, amongst other things, even disagreeing with Blessed John Paul II, that contraception and abortion are not fruits of the same tree. He argued that contraception was at the root of the tree. And, you know, we really have to think about these things because you'll be in my position in 40 years' time trying to convince people of the same things, and things will have got much worse unless we understand these lessons now, unless we take on board these messages now. The formal cooperation with evil talk, the whole question of cooperation of evil that Dr. Helen Watts spoke about, terribly important. You know, pro-life organisations can spend an awful long time, decades, fighting for the wrong sort of legislation, fighting for legislation that actually abandons disabled children, for example. May we never, ever do anything like that again. But this sort of mistake is being repeated in different parts of the world. And I'm not criticising other groups. SPUC's made mistakes. We try to learn from them. No doubt we'll make more mistakes. But look again at Dr. Helen Watts' arguments in her paper on the cooperation with evil, and a wonderful book by Colin Hart, who was the full-time carer for Alison Davis, who many of you, I'm sure, know, who wrote a book, Changing Unjust Laws Justly. I think it's a terribly important book. And, you know, we must have hope because Dr. Tom Ward showed us how a tiny group of determined individuals in powerful positions in society have worked historically to undermine family life and thereby the sanctity of human life. Now, you are a tiny group of individuals. I think there are more of you than there were people fighting for the evils that have swamped our world in recent years. And Dr. Ward, who's an historian, is nodding his head in agreement at the back. More of you here. They did it in a remarkably short time. And you are very, very well informed and going to become more well informed. But we have to be realistic. It will be a long battle. When I first began helping my predecessor as chief executive of SPUC, Phyllis Bowman, in the early 1970s, I gave up teaching and I said, I'll give this a year. I reckon we'll have the pro-abortion lobby on the run in a year. Seriously. Well, you know, I was young. I thought we've got to leaflet every household. You know, we'll get hold of all our hundreds of branches and so on. And then, of course, you get overwhelmed with other activities, the pro-abortion initiatives you get caught up with. And 40 years later, maybe we're not very much closer to that ideal I had of doing it in a year. So I've grown up. I'm now more mature, and I think we'll do it in 4 years, starting from today, because 2018 is the 50th anniversary of the Abortion Act coming into force on the 27th of April, 1968. 50th anniversary of the Abortion Act coming into force. We calculate that by that time, over 9 million unborn children would have been killed, registered abortions under the Abortion Act. And so my challenge is, can we find 900 leaders around the country in 4 years. Is that possible? Let's think about it. Can we find 900 leaders, each of whom will distribute on a regular basis 10,000 leaflets? So you give out 9 million leaflets to door throughout the country. I really want you to think about this, because one of the lessons we've learned, and listen, the main purpose of the speakers here today, trying to think how young they go, but the main purpose of our talks is to hand on what we know to you, because we'll be gone in a few years' time and you will be the leaders. So you really got to learn from our experience, and I want to try to share with you as best I can what that experience has been. And I don't believe that it's going to be politicians who change the law. That's a strange thing for a group dedicated to lobbying Parliament. But the law will be changed in Telford, in Linlithgow in Scotland. When people in Linlithgow in Scotland and in Telford here in England, you bump into them in the streets and they say, isn't it terrible about abortion? Isn't it awful what's happening? I was watching something on television last night. I had a leaflet through my door. We've got to change people's hearts and minds. That's how there was a huge reduction in Poland. And that happened before the change in legislation in Poland. There was a huge reduction in the numbers of abortions. And it was because after the fall, or in the run-up to the fall of communism, there was a huge educational campaign going on. And communism was weakening its hold on people. And the message was getting across. Now, the one secret weapon we've got is utter commitment. All right, of a minority. But can we find 900 leaders to do that? Will you be one of those leaders? So there's a few other things that I feel we've learned. Pat has spoken a lot about the strength, power and utter determination of the pro-abortion lobby. I want to just say a few little things about that again. That's the first thing I want to mention. The second thing, I want to talk about the importance of Catholic Church officials, both for good and for evil, in the pro-life struggle. Now, I make no apology for focusing on Catholic Church officials as a Catholic myself. And I want to emphasise that SPUC has pioneered cooperation with Muslims, evangelicals, and people of all faiths, and none of our founding members were Catholic. But you only had to be at Mass this morning to know how many Catholics are here this weekend. And that is a reflection not just of the work here, it's the reflection of the work all over the world. And as a Catholic, I'm proud of that. I'm proud that largely lay people, supported by some wonderful priests and some very good bishops, do stand up and fight. But it's important, given the importance of the way we're made up, in terms of where our strength comes from, to examine what is actually happening in the Catholic Church's name. Notice I'm saying in the Catholic Church's name. I'm not saying the Catholic Church, talking about officials within the Catholic Church. I'll come back to that. I want to talk about how the pro-life movement cannot defeat the culture on its own, on your own, on our own. But I also want to say that although we are a tiny minority, although you may feel a tiny minority, and you'll often feel a minority of one when you go back home, not a minority of 90 or 100, when you speak the truth about abortion, about euthanasia, about human sexuality, about the lies that are being told, you speak with authority. You speak with power. Just like Jesus Christ spoke with power and authority. Humbly, though, with love, but with great confidence as you go out to your fellow citizens, to your fellow students, and also to those in worldly and spiritual power. So let me just say a little bit more about the power, strength and utter determination of the pro-abortion lobby, so we're clear what we're up against. The Society for the Protection of Unborn Children was formed in 1966, the first pro-life organisation to be established anywhere in the world, and over the decades we've built and run major campaigns against abortion in Britain, Ireland, in the European institutions, European Union, European Council, UN. I believe we've saved lives. We've also experienced terrible setbacks, we've made mistakes, and we've seen advances, terrible advances, in the culture of death. Now, these campaigns that we've run on abortion primarily have opened our eyes to other related evils and injustices, such as euthanasia, assisted suicide, corrupting anti-life sex education, and recently to so-called same-sex marriage. Now, SPUC as a pro-life organisation fought against same-sex marriage legislation for two reasons. Firstly, statistical evidence on abortion clearly shows that marriage as an institution protects children, both born and unborn. And secondly, same-sex marriage represents an attempt to redefine marriage, thus undermining marriage as a growing body of academic research clearly shows, and we have that research available. This undermining, therefore, leads to lessening the protection for unborn children which true marriage provides. Furthermore, the homosexual rights agenda is targeted at children in their early school years or from their early school years. Now, I'm sorry to have to share with you this, but homosexual militants are being invited into primary schools in Britain, including in Catholic primary schools, with the blessing of local bishops, to train teachers on how to educate little boys and little girls as young as 4 years old, as they might grow up to marry a man if they're a little boy, or they might grow up to marry a woman if they're a little girl. Now, we must also reflect on the fact that once you implant the ideas, especially in tender young minds, that this is part of reality, it is absolutely part of the homosexual rights agenda. Has already become clear that they demand reproductive health rights. How? Through in vitro fertilisation. For every one baby born through in vitro fertilisation, 24 are thrown away or frozen or used for experiments or die in the natural events prior to birth. But of course the whole thing has been one big unnatural experiment, as it were. And so how are we actually going to fight against abortion if IVF has got to be there and it necessarily involves such massive destruction of human life? It's going to make our task, nothing's impossible, but it will appear impossible. So unless we really take a stand on these. I want to say something about the geopolitical significance of Britain foreign policy in relation to laws which our country passes on abortion and other related evils. And in connection with Britain's foreign policy, I want to say something about the geopolitical significance of the role which has been played by the Catholic Bishops' Conference of England and Wales. Now, 1/3 of the world's population, approximately 2.3 billion people, as Dr. Ward pointed out, live in common law jurisdictions or in systems mixed with civil law. In particular, common law originated in England in the early Middle Ages and remains the basis of the legal system in England and in those countries which trace their legal heritage to England, such as former colonies of the British Empire. And for decades, Britain and its Foreign Office have successfully exported so-called abortion law reform jurisdiction abortion law reform through common law jurisdiction and through British Commonwealth countries from Australia to South Africa and elsewhere. The British government is now committed to promoting worldwide homosexual law reform and same-sex marriage legislation through this network. And the British Prime Minister, David Cameron, has threatened to withhold UK aid from countries that do not conform, saying in connection with the homosexual rights agenda, as he has also said in connection with the abortion, British aid should have more strings attached. Now, furthermore, the British and European Union have enacted a body of law regarding homosexual rights. And the Catholic bishops of Conference of England and Wales produced what they call diversity and equality guidelines, which welcomes and seeks to implement and states that it will monitor government policy within the church on these matters, including in Catholic schools. Now, a pro-abortion document, sorry, this is hard going, you can watch it on YouTube later and check all the facts that I've mentioned, prepared at the request of the EU Commission on the right to conscientious objection, links rights relating to sexual orientation to other supposed rights, including the right to abortion and the right to euthanasia and assisted suicide. And the EU Commission document quotes in part from the Catholic Bishops' Conference of England and Wales document, Diversity and Equality Guidelines. Thus, their policy is helping the British government to promote its homosexual rights and abortion agenda throughout Europe through a document from the European Commission linking homosexual rights to abortion rights. In addition, in Britain, induced abortion and birth control drugs and devices are provided to children in schools, including in Catholic schools, under the age of 16. And this is happening with the cooperation of the Catholic authorities. Now, you can rest assured that we leave no stone unturned in trying to get the message to important figures in Britain and in Rome on these issues, because they are opposing our human rights work. I'm not just doing this as a Catholic, I'm doing it as a campaigner. We've got to stop something happening which is actually advancing the government's agenda. Where does it leave tiny pro-life groups when that is happening on behalf of all the Catholics in England and Wales, on your behalf? And we have a right and duty to speak up on this. Nicely, charitably, in an accurate way, making sure we've got our facts. We must start doing this. And any time you think something is wrong, you're probably right, because you've got experience, you've got an instinct about these things. Take it up, check it out, start doing something about it. Now, the other point that I want to return to is what Pat was saying about the catastrophic abortion legislation introduced in Ireland. How in Ireland, in Catholic Ireland, has legislation been passed which is amongst the most extreme in the world? It's not the fault of the Irish pro-life movement, in my opinion. It's not the fault of Irish Catholics. I think there's a very big percentage, well, it's a minority percentage, but it's still big in terms of comparing that with the rest of the world, who are really do believe in the things that the church teaches on the sanctity of human life. It's not their fault. The culture of death is having an overwhelming impact on society and throughout the world. And any analysis of what's happened in Ireland, and indeed what's happening in Britain, which doesn't take on board that great big geopolitical fact, the geopolitical facts that Pat has explained so well. You know, when Obama was elected, he made absolutely clear that it was his first priority to spread abortion on demand, including to adolescents between the ages of 10 and 24 to every country of the world. And Hillary Clinton made that doubly clear in cross-examination from pro-life Congressman Chris Smith. And Obama's and the British government's pro-abortion allies, as Pat has pointed out in detail this morning, have been working flat out to oppose conscientious objection to abortion. Pat mentioned Christine McCafferty at the Council of Europe. She's not acting in isolation. Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the UN, and Nafanefen Pillay, the Human Rights Commissioner, produced a document on discrimination against women in law and practice and how the issue is addressed throughout the United Nations human rights system. And in their report, they called for the policing of nations worldwide to address the refusal of physicians to perform legal abortions. You know, that's the context in which we are fighting our case for the courageous Connie Wood and Mary Dugan, the Glasgow midwives. They sacrificed their careers. Connie Wood is working in other work. Mary Dugan has been so badly affected by it, she's stopped working. She's not earning any money at all. She's living in semi-poverty. But she can't wait till it all stops so she can go out and preach the word. You know, we have to be prepared for that sort of sacrifice. And I'm afraid, you know, you're going to be leading the charge in this area. We can't defeat the culture of death on our own. You know, when you look at the recent experience of Ireland, of Brazil, where abortion was legalised, a week after Pope Francis visited, in the Philippines, where abortion legislation, population control legislation, in a country where they have vigorously opposed it, has been legalised. It's being held up in the courts right now, but that's happened through the pressure of the Obama government on the Philippines, as leading politicians in the Philippines have told me personally. We can't defeat this culture on our own. Yes, we've had our successes. SPUC's won important legal battles. We've actually won on the Glasgow midwives case in the Court of Appeal. Cost us about £250,000 to do that, and now it's going to the Supreme Court. We've kept abortion, an extension of abortion legislation out of Northern Ireland. We kept it out of Ireland for decades. We've had our successes, but we must be full of hope as a result of that, but we mustn't kid ourselves. The forced abortion regime in China is funded by taxpayers of virtually every nation on earth, as the IPPF, Marie Stopes International and UNFPA, funded by governments worldwide, cooperate with China's forced abortions policies. Developing nations are under pressure from powerful Western governments to legalise abortion, as I've mentioned. And in our own countries, countless millions of abortions take place annually, recorded under the abortion statistics and unrecorded under the guise of so-called contraceptive drugs and devices, so overwhelmingly accepted throughout society and widely in use even within the Catholic community. So let's not kid ourselves. The pro-life movement, however hard-working we are, however well-informed, however blessed and strong we may be in our initiatives, we can't defeat the culture of death on our own. If we put all of our membership lists together and all of our finances together, including in America and elsewhere, we're infinitesimally tiny in comparison with the worldly power, riches and reach of the culture of death. When we're working at our best, pro-life organisations are catalysts for action on the part of the wider community, and we often punch our weight in terms of the human resources, well above our weight, I should say, in terms of the human resources available to us. What we lack in numbers, we endeavour to make up with our nearly 5 decades of experience, expertise, spiritual commitment and support. But we can't defeat the culture of death on our own, which threatens constantly to overwhelm us. Tom Ward said yesterday that we've got to be prepared for every law protecting life and the family being repealed, got rid of in the years to come. We have to be prepared for that sort of reality. But in those circumstances in particular, we've got to be fortified by the unequivocal, unyielding voice of Catholic Church officials and other church officials, other faiths too, of course, and bishops throughout the world. But tragically, some of the most pernicious influences where legalised abortion is concerned does come from officials within the Catholic Church. Now, I am going on about this for a very good reason, because you're going to find out about this very quickly if you don't already, and you'll be bewildered and you'll think you're doing something wrong. You've got to be prepared for it and do something about it. Staying with the Irish example, a key figure in the Republic of Ireland is a Father Patrick Hannon, Emeritus Professor of Moral Theology in St Patrick's College, Maynooth. He wrote an article which was published in time for the passage of the Irish abortion law in the July-August 2013 edition of The Furrow. And The Furrow magazine describes itself as a monthly journal for the contemporary Catholic Church, which enjoys an international reputation as a courageous and impartial forum, blah, blah, blah. Now, I'm assured by a Catholic priest friend of mine in Ireland that the July-August 2013 edition of The Furrow would have been read widely by priests and bishops in Ireland in the days and weeks prior to the passage of Ireland's pro-abortion legislation. Whether or not that's a coincidence, I don't comment. But referring to the legislation, Father Hannon's article concluded, a legislator who's a Catholic and who wishes to honour the legacy of Catholic tradition in these grave matters is both obliged and free to examine each side of the argument and come to his or her own conclusions about what human rights and the common good require at this time. So here's a green light for a Catholic politician in Ireland to vote in favour of legalised abortion. And there was a huge majority which did so. A legislation which Pat has said had nothing to stop abortion right up to birth, and very limited, if any, conscientious objection allowed. Father Hannon sets up the teaching of the Catholic Church against secular authorities that disagree with Catholic teaching, and then concludes that the Catholic politician is free to make up his or her own mind. Moreover, he suggests without argumentation that a Catholic politician is, I quote, honouring the legacy of Catholic tradition in these grave matters by making up his or her own mind. Now, it's contrary to reason to claim that one is honouring the legacy of Catholic tradition by repudiating the authoritative teaching of the magisterium by deferring to other opinions which violate the right to life of the unborn. And in a spirit of friendly dialogue with the Catholic bishops in Ireland, I would say if it wasn't possible for you to forbid the distribution of such a wicked article just before the legislation went through, can't you now contact every priest, every Catholic in Ireland to point out the fundamental egregious errors in Father Hannon's text? And shouldn't you do so as a matter of urgency? We have to appeal to church leaders throughout the world, to church leaders in Rome, to all Catholic bishops in the world, with the words of John Paul II from the Gospel of Life, Evangelium Vitae, ringing in our ears, that bishops are the first ones to be called to be untiring preachers of the Gospel of Life. Silence, and the silence which includes equivocal or half-hearted words in the face of the daily slaughter, the maiming of mothers' and fathers' lives, simply won't do. the silence and equivocation that we've seen for the most part of the Irish bishops during the past 40 years, as thousands of Irish mothers have travelled to Britain each year, as our speaker, Dr. Pravin, pointed out yesterday. If it were Catholic priests or Jews who were being killed, or threatened with being killed by national laws in Britain or in other parts of the world, would we expect any day of the week ever to enter a church without the matter being mentioned or being mentioned during the service? Would we not be denouncing, and rightly denouncing, the killing of Catholic priests or Jews in every pulpit of the world, notwithstanding the past sins and scandals associated with members of the Catholic Church? The Jew, the priest, the unborn child are all made in the image and likeness of God. Now, in a speech I gave in Ireland late last year, I predicted that if the Irish bishops don't get this right very soon, it won't be long before the first direct abortion under the new legislation will take place in a hospital where the chairman of the board is a Catholic bishop. It's time for all responsible Catholics to challenge church officials at the highest level that they should appoint bishops who will carry out the duties spelled out for them in Pope John Paul II's Evangelium Vitae. And here I want to return to the point that I made, that although you are a tiny minority, when you speak the truth about these matters, you speak with authority, you speak with power, just like Jesus Christ spoke with power and authority, humbly, with love, but with confidence to your fellow citizens, fellow students, and to those in worldly and spiritual authority. So I would sum up by saying there needs to be a declaration of total resistance to abortion and to all these evils that we're fighting. I think as a Catholic, I think it should be backed by open prayer. I mean, when there's a huge disaster, people say, oh, you mustn't associate prayer with the fight against abortion. You know, when there's a huge disaster, like a war, for example, don't all the secular politicians trot off to St. Paul's Cathedral? Doesn't the Queen turn out? Doesn't everybody get on their knees to pray? Isn't that, you know, what happened during recent wars in which Britain was being involved? We shouldn't be shy of using our spiritual powers, if you like, our spiritual gifts, I should say. We use our intellectual gifts. We use our gifts of energy and youth and enthusiasm. Why have we got to bury alive one part of our gifts? We need to be, this is the biggest crisis that humanity's ever faced. I mean, that's what got me involved 40 years ago. Over 40 years ago now, I read Jack Scarisbrick's book, What's Wrong with Abortion, The Chairman of Life. And the first paragraph I read, I thought, this is the biggest disaster in history. How could there be anything worse than killing the smallest child? And in such numbers. Already by then it was bigger than all the wars. The deaths that had taken place were bigger than all the wars put together in the whole of British history. That was then. That was 40 years ago. So I just sum up the points I've made. Parliament is not going to change the law against abortion. Politicians are not going to change the law against abortion. The law against abortion will be changed in the hearts and minds of the people of this country, and we have to go out and witness to do that. As young people at the conference this weekend, you are light years ahead of my generation when we were your age. Never stop informing yourselves. You never will know all the answers, and when you do know all the answers, you'll start forgetting them. When you speak with truth, when you speak with love, you speak with authority and power. You need to use your capacity to speak the truth with authority and power, not only to influence Parliament, but also to influence Catholic Church officials to join courageous bishops like Bishop Egan, Bishop Mark Davis, Bishop Oldstead in the United States, other courageous bishops who have done their jobs. But they had the charism to reach out to far more than we do. But we had the charism, we are the catalysts that help them to do all of that. There were two famous people in recent years, one infamous, one rightly famous, who received the Nobel Peace Prize. One was Barack Obama, and the other was Mother Teresa. I think the values of Mother Teresa, who said there won't be peace in the world until we have peace in the womb, will triumph against the values of Barack Obama, who's committed to spreading death and destruction and undermining families in every country of the world. And I think it will happen because you're here this weekend and because you are far greater in number than the people who engineered all these terrible problems we're facing today. But do it with the spirit that you were dancing last night, and you'll dance with your grandchildren. Thank you.